And welcome everyone to another Smart Money Circle episode. I'm Adam Sarhan. With me today is Lavell J. Malloy II, who's the chairman and CEO of Bragg House Holdings. Ticker symbol is TBH. Lavelle, thank you so much for taking the time and welcome to the Smart Money Circle.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam. I really appreciate it.
So, Lavelle, I always like to begin. Can you please tell us your story and how you got to where you are today?
It kind of starts back really when I played college sports back back when, and I kind of tore my Achilles, and that's kind of was like the first start of it. And then, um, kind of moved on from there. After a bit of depression, my first touch point with kind of building communities, I would say, was me playing video games to get out of my depression for tearing my Achilles and not going to be a Major League Baseball player. And then after that, my life kind of took me to law school, became a securities lawyer. Um, you know, Along the way, had a very successful career in Wall Street, but along the way, got in contact with, professional athletes, helped them start my first startup business, and then did my second startup business, which was really starting a soccer team and really kind of putting financial rails on it, a minor league soccer team. And then kind of leading to that, those two were two very successful exits. But what I kind of learned pretty quickly was that, you can really do a lot with community. I call it culture to capital. And I was able to kind of then go into where I am right now for Bragg House. And, in Bragg House, what I, you know, what I wanted to do was kind of prove that you can build a community on the intersection of gaming, college sports, which again was very important to me, gaming, college sports, and social interaction, and then monetize that, and as well as give one of the hardest to reach audiences, Gen Z, a voice. So that's kind of like a kind of overview of kind of how I got into where I am.
I love that. So that you were a lawyer, you went to securities law, so you had background in finance, and you moved into other businesses, and then here you launched Bragg House. So my next question for you is, please tell us about Bragg House, what you do, and your competitive advantages.
So what Braghouse is that we are a media tech platform. And, one of the things that when I first looked at Braghouse, when I first looked at creating it, was two reasons why I created it. One, I looked at it, I was a big avid game player of NCAA college sports, college football. And when I looked at that and I looked at their financial performance and stuff, they like made billions with this college things. But you know, in 2014, they stopped making the game, and that was it. And I kept saying, has to be people smarter than me who are going to be able to do this. And they didn't. So I kind of said, you know what? I would like to do that. So what I did is I, really created a platform where, as I mentioned, on the intersection of gaming, college sports, and social interaction, and I just let people interact. And I tried to use that community and that really active participation to kind of create this platform. And then I think, on the basis of that, what I tried to do is really create a data model. And I'll be completely transparent. The data model was built on, understanding why this audience is hard to reach, understanding what they do. And that data model that I built really gave us a really, really good advantage because we then kind of turned our media platform almost to a proprietary data engine. And that data engine gave us really behavioral insights, behavioral data that now we can really, that brands could then use that information, definable information, and say, okay, great, this is how we're going to go and attract, our audience, our new audience.
Wow, I love that. So somebody comes to your platform, can you just let us know, A, what's in it for me? Like the greatest radio station in the world for everybody is WIIFM. What's in it for me? And then two, how they interact.
Yeah, it's so the mechanism is kind of simple in the first part of it. We people come in, they get to find their different channels, they get to figure out, obviously they're categorized by their sports team, by their college, because our I think is focused mostly on Gen Z, and they get to connect with other people. The the gaming part of it is really what we've taken to, we try to find, what ways are people going to interact constantly with each other? That was gaming. So, they can start a game, they can play a game, they can look at other people play games. And then I said, okay, all really great, but what is the other thing that I felt like Gen Z and people really like? They like to bet. They love statistics, they love to predict. And I said, this is college, so I wrestled a while with, do I want to go with those regulations? Do I want to make this back? And I came up with something called bragging. And what bragging really is that you get to put statistical predictions on really how you think an outcome is going to be. And it could be sports outcomes, in the game, how you think someone's going to uh, do well in the game, how they're going to interact. And that's kind of how we did it. And then that bragging functionality really unites everything because that bragging functionality layered on top of that functionality the analyzation, the picking a side, the commitment to a virtual currency, risk tolerance, affinities, all those data models I built inside that bragging functionality. So what people got, our clients like McDonald's and Coca-Cola, was they didn't just get, okay, well, a million people saw this ad. What they got instead was, why are they on here? What are they doing? How do they react to certain campaigns? And how they're going to react to future campaigns based on what we really know about them. So it became almost predictive. And in that way, really, really kind of distinguished us from anyone else because at the end of the day, we really got, what I call that community loyalty. And people were like, great, this makes more sense. We want to be part of this and we're gonna give you what you need for it though.
Gotcha. No, that makes perfect sense. Thank you for that overview. So let's talk about risk management. Lavelle, how do you handle risk and what are some mistakes you see people make with respect to risk management?
So, that again, for my securities lawyer hat comes on pretty, pretty tight. That's something that we definitely wanted to make sure. There's a couple ways that I guess I've seen it, in this type of platform. One, I think you see in just, privacy issues. That's something we take, very, very serious. It was actually one of the first things we built out to make sure that, there was really strong privacy protection. And obviously we work with the AWSs and all that stuff. We have really, really strong, privacy ecosystems built in there. But that was something we were very, very careful of. And I think that kind of also impressed a lot of universities because, from our Learfield partnership, we work with, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of universities. So to see that we have that protection, was pretty good. The other thing was really with something that's probably unique to the gaming world is kind of like bullying or cyberbullying. And that was something that a lot of people, I guess, kind of saw. Um, I think we don't see that as much. And I think that's kind of because we created this atmosphere is kind of just more social, like the demographics that we face on, like we're a media tech platform. We're not in, an esports platform. And what I mean that big distinction is that, there's so many different personas of people who interact through gaming. Some people want to build games. Some people want to watch games as spectators. Some people want to play games. But, none of the people, at least on our platform, are like, hey, we want to be professional, gamers. So that's the difference between a $30 billion market and a $300 billion market. So really that piece that we said on the intersection of the gaming is really just a connection there. So we don't see that cyberbullying as much, but we also have protections in a way to make sure that, that doesn't happen. And then everything else really was, I don't want to say easy, but I'm a securities lawyer. So being a public company was something that, I was able to, we've always run our company, even privately, with very strong corporate governance, just to make sure that we were doing everything right. So that became a little bit easier when now we have like a team of securities lawyers.
Right. You speak their language, so to speak,
I
instead
do.
of on yeah, right. Okay, I
Exactly.
love that.
Probably
Yeah,
too much.
right, exactly. Well, that's a it's a benefit. Okay, great. So thank you for that. Let's talk about timeless lessons, Lavelle, you've learned along your career, along your life that you want to share with the audience. Go in any direction you want, personal, professional, anywhere you want to go.
I think kind of so it's I think I'll start kind of with professional. What I've learned is that, in getting the audience, what I feel like people do, again, essentially we are a media advertisement data insights platform. And what I've learned, which kind of set us apart from the market, is that, I've spoken to all the executives of pretty much all the major brands, and they admittedly, they'll tell you this. They try to target the customer, and they'll get the customer and they'll say, "Hey, buy this, do this, go this, do this," and that doesn't really work with this new kind of Gen Z. And the cost of acquisition is kind of they say, "Hey, we'll spend this amount of money to do that." And what I've learned is something that I think is, again, I think I said it was community loyalty. And I believe community loyalty is one of the strongest asset classes. And I believe, what I've seen is that a passionate community is probably the most efficient way to, form capital, to be honest with you. And so what we did is that we started with the community first. And then because we had the loyalty of the community, we built the platform for them. Our CAC was significantly lower, but our lifetime value was much higher. So really, however you want to put it there, I thought that was, that's something that I think we're in a good enough position now that it probably makes sense for just a lot of these companies just to hire us. That was, I think community loyalty as an asset class is probably one of the most valuable things that I've learned. For me personally, I think the best thing I would say, kind of like as an entrepreneur is really, I think everyone thinks that you have to build something that's out there already. And I never been a believer of that. I always said that, hey, solve for something, but put financial rails on it that makes sense. So that's kind of what I've done. And I guess that's kind of business and personal. But I did something that I thought, hey, a little bit of a passion. I'm really good at building communities, but put the financial rails that are going to make money for them and are going to make them so that they're scalable. And I think that was kind of like the defining moment to do it. What I will say from a completely personal thing, my wife has helped me out that she said, very early on, she was like, don't give up your dream, but just set things, set milestones for you, and I think that was probably the best lesson because though I had this very rigorous legal background, strict training, even going into sports where you're like, very regimented in what you need to do, like at the level that I got to, I'm just an entrepreneur at heart. So it's like, I see and I'm like, great, this is what the problem is. And I will probably keep building until it's solved. So my wife was like, and I think this is really good advice for any kind of entrepreneur. That's okay, do that, but set milestones. Don't just keep spending all your money until you
Right.
do it. Make sure you get results A, B, and C before you move on to the next thing. And that probably was the best advice to keep my family, which to make sure we did it. So I appreciate that advice from a personal level.
Yeah, no, it's really, really powerful. Otherwise, people get lost in their heads. I think Tony Robbins has a great line. He goes, if you stay in your head, you're dead. So you got to get out of your head and just go in the world and have those milestones. I love that. All right,
Exactly.
next question for you. The opposite is the mistakes. What are some timeless mistakes you've made, you've seen other people make? How do you learn from them so you don't keep repeating them?
Yeah, I think my biggest mistakes that I make, probably still really, is I'm a very again I'm building community. I think it comes easy to me because I understand community. I'm a very community focused person. Trusting is a thing that, and and you reach certain levels. So I think you have to kind of validate. It's okay to trust, but trust and validate. So I made a lot of mistakes of just kind of, saying, oh, this person, they work for DraftKings. They have to, and I'll give you a funny story. Um, I was sitting down, we're upstate, and this guy was like, he started this company and we're hiring, and he was like, hey, I want to come on the board, I work for DraftKings. I started this, and I was like, this is amazing. Like this guy really understands the, betting part of kind of what we did. My wife was like, I don't think this guy has any value. I said, well, but I said, no, but I really think, and I'll just end it by saying he didn't have value. And, so trust but validate. I think that's something that I think is kind of really, really important. So, kind of made mistakes kind of there. And, really, I think all the other mistakes that people make and that I've made, really just learn from those mistakes. So if you bring someone on, it didn't work, why didn't it work? Could we have done anything different to start with? Um, you know, in starting some of the early activations, time frame, when are people on? Like the reason why I actually invented the data part of it, that came second, is because I kind of saw that, I was like, this worked. Why did this work? So I wanted to understand it. But at first, we went viral when we first started, but we'll do an event here and won't get the same results, or we won't get the certain things. Certain games have stronger followings than other games, and just a lot of small things that you see and you're like, oh, okay. So I would say the biggest thing really goes back to trust, just because everybody wants to work with you, everybody wants there. I'm someone who sees the value in everybody. And that's a good thing. I think it's helped me as a leader, but validate, make sure that again, having the milestones. Again, my wife, who's probably the best business person I know now, and never taken a business class.
Love it. Yeah, it's so powerful. So, okay, thank you for that. Let's talk about leadership. You're chairman of the board, CEO. You worked in big firms, a securities lawyer in sports, leadership. What makes a great leader, and what are some lessons about leadership that you'd like to share with the audience?
I think what makes a really good leader is listening. I think that's really important, but also not being scared to act. I have really strong, operations people around me. I work with my best friend who, is the chief operating officer, strong financial leaders. I've really, really good, our lawyers, now we have some of the best lawyers that I think are amazing. So being able to kind of trust that advice from them. But again, you making sure you have the right people around you to start with. That's the validation part, but then not being ever scared to act. The securities law gives, kind of protection. It's called the business judgment rule. And the business judgment rule is that, based on an informed decision, you should be allowed to make business judgments for the company. And that is such a, until you actually become that business leader, you really don't understand the value of that. Because if you're like scared of every decision you're going to make, you're not going to make a good decision just because of that, or, every decision, if it's just safe, is also not going to get to the value you have. But if you really, really break that down, if you're informed, so again, you're not just shooting off the hip, you're informed, you researched it, and you're saying, hey, my conclusion is that this is the best for the company, that is something that, has really, really served me well. Again, I've made mistakes, but it served me well, again, where we are now, what we have accomplished so far. But I wouldn't be able to do that if I was always kind of worried about everything. So like I said, compliance is in my DNA. You know, my mistake won't cost anything that's going to be terrible, but that freedom of being able to kind of, explore and say, I believe this is right for the company now. And you're backed by your board, obviously. My board has a lot of faith in me. But being able to confidently do that, be in circles and sitting down and making these opportunities, that's something I think that I encourage every leader to actively use the skill set of why they've been put in that position as a leader.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I love that, the courage to act and not just, I think I should do
Exactly.
this, but not actually do it. Doing it is what's huge. Uh,
Exactly.
okay, I love that. So thank you for that. Next question for you is adversity. Being successful, you have to handle adversity and overcome obstacles. How do you handle adversity, and what are some obstacles you had to overcome along the way?
I think it's kind of really just putting your head down and getting it done. I'm very old school with that. I believe that, I believe in myself. I believe in my team. And I just think you have to kind of just put your head down and do it. The biggest adversity in connection to Bragg House has really been going public. And, it was a very challenging thing. I mean, which again, I think any company going public is. And we had to decide at one point, again, making strong business judgment, we had decided at one point, do we stay private? We had a convertible debt note, which is, it means you raise money, but it accumulates interest, so it's an investment, but at the same time, it collects interest and then there's payable at a certain interest. And we said, okay, we're just starting to get traction right now. We have some of the biggest clients. This was right before our Learfield deal. And, Learfield, for people who don't know, is a billion-dollar conglomerate that owns the media rights of every major college. They own their media rights there. We're just about to start our activations with them. Do we continue, kind of pay these people off and then really start doing revenue or generating? Or do we go public? And then if we go public, we had to make a decision to not work on our technology, to not work on our partnerships. And it was a lot because we would have lost traction with what we were building, but we would have been if everything worked out, we would have put ourselves in a position where clean balance sheet, no debt whatsoever, um, a lot of capital and access to capital as well. Um, and we chose the public market route. And there was a lot of adversity. The negative part about that is, we had to kind of stop with some of the you know progression that we were doing, and with our activations and the data building, and focus almost 100% on going public. The pros, which I believe is still the right decision, we weren't public, and many companies were not able to do that. We came out with the best case scenario possible, so no financial debt, got a great market, um, uh, and then now we have capital, we have access to capital, we still have all our major partnerships, um, and as you can see from just the current events now, we have an opportunity, which I believe is a great opportunity to create, what I've done in related to what I believe has been transformative into the media tech and data insights. We now have the opportunity to create, I think, probably one of the largest financial, um, communities in the entire world.
Wow.
So, it's not small decisions, and definitely all had ramifications, but ultimately believe was the right one.
Hats off to you. Super, super. Congratulations and super well done.
Thank you.
Final question for you today. What is the best piece of advice you'd like to give the audience or your 20-year-old self?
Um, I'd probably say that you learn from everything, and to just really don't be discouraged by failure. Failure happens. Um, but also I think, so I would probably tell myself that. And then I guess the other thing, which you kind of heard really throughout, and I do want to emphasize this to any leader, is you have a good team. You need to really make sure you have a good team, because again, you're going to be out there making decisions. I do all the traveling. I'm obviously the face, so news reporters, people contact me, but I have a great team and I trust them. And, there's no I, as I've learned in college when I played sports, there's no I in anything I do. So, I think, those would probably be learn from your mistakes, pick yourself back up, keep going, and you'll get there.
Well, congrats on all your success and getting there and keep going and seeing where you're going to be. I'm look forward to seeing where you're going to be as we go forward. And hopefully we'll have you on again soon. This is really great.
I very enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me, Adam.